Catherine is now going to remind us about, do you remember this part of this meeting is to talk about the MacIntyre Promises? So you started talking about this a little bit last time, and I think Catherine is just going to remind you what you've talked about already.
So what we wanted to do was find out what people think about the promises. So it wasn't asking people for new promises, it was to ask them whether they think they're good or not so good. You know, are they the right promises? So is that okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
We had some ideas. So Vicky said, very obviously, we just need to ask people. So we said, well, how are we going to ask people? So some of the ideas that we had last time was that we might create a leaflet in easy read that asks people what they think. I think it was Mark said that we could have some sort of audio, you know, record the questions for people. We talked about going out to the My Voice groups that we've got in the organisation. We talked about asking people in groups, and we talked about that maybe looking at the things people complain about might also tell us if we've got the promises right. And I think that was it. So do shout out if there's anything that I've missed.
But does that sound right to everybody? Nobody thinks we've missed your idea? Okay. So I wanted to start off by asking you to think, if you are asking people, are these the right promises? Is that the only question you need to ask? Do you need to ask anything else when you're checking in with people? So what I'm meaning is, you don't want people to say, oh, we need 20 new promises or anything, do you? You're just asking, are these about right? How are they working? Is there anything else? You know, what do you think are the questions you want to ask people about these promises? Has anybody got thoughts about that? Mark?
Mark.
What does it mean to staff?
So what does it mean to staff?
No, to everybody.
To everybody.
What does it mean? Yeah.
So we could have any promises, but if nobody understands them, there's no point in the way, is there?
So that's a great point, Mark. So did others get that as well?
Yeah, I get that.
Mark's saying, if we're asking people, are these the right promises? Are they? We need to check that they understand them or what they mean to them.
That's it.
What do other people think about that? Anybody got anything to add to that? Anything you think different, or you're allowed to think different? No, is that you agreeing, Stuart? Yeah. Jane, did you have anything to add?
I think we need to make sure that everyone knows the promises as well, like new people that are coming into the organisation, how they're introduced to promises.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So what I'm hearing from you all is you want to check that people know them. Have they heard of them? Do they understand them? What do they mean to them? And do they think they're the right kind of things for MacIntyre? Is that right?
Especially somebody new, I suppose. That's what you're saying, isn't it, Jane?
Yeah. Lots of new people joining, and it's nice to know that the MacIntyres have been introduced.
That's great. Has anybody else got anything that you want to think about like what you're asking, what you're really asking people about these promises? Paul and Ian, did you have something?
Last year in Milton Keynes, as our shout out group is one of our advocacy groups in MacIntyre, and we went through. We had the year of the promise. A really good way of showing the promises was examples. So for people to come show us good and bad examples of what those promises look like to be used in like training and visual aids, so it's not just words, there's visuals that go with it. So that was something we learned from going through them all.
Yeah, we did, yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So maybe, what do others think when you come to making the plan, and we're going to do that in a minute, maybe what they learned in Milton Keynes you could use as part of sharing with everybody?
Yeah, well, we did film the whole year, so there is a half an hour film of everything we did. So if that would be useful to see, that we can share that, can't we?
Yeah, brilliant.
Brilliant.
Okay, Gwen, go on, sorry.
All our new staff will see the making of the MacIntyre Promises and the so what about the MacIntyre Promises film. It's part of MacIntyre induction, and an induction is what staff have to do when they start a new job so that they learn how to do it properly. We do have a new film to share, so staff will know about the promises. I wonder if the people who use MacIntyre services will all know about the promises. I think that's a really good question.
Do you know, Gwen, I was just thinking that as you talked about staff. So my next question to all of you was, who do you need to ask? So if you're gonna be asking, have you heard of them? Do they make sense to you? Do you think they're the right things for MacIntyre now? You might make those questions a bit better than I'm making them off the top of my head. Who do you want to ask those questions? Anybody got any ideas?
I think it's better if we started at the bottom and then we're already up the food chain, as it were.
So Mark's suggesting that you ask everybody, but that you don't start with managers and you don't start with senior managers.
Yeah.
You start by asking people who are supported by MacIntyre and direct support workers, and then teams. What do people think about that?
Yes.
Rhiannon, were you wanting to come in?
Yeah. You can ask all the staff, so the staff that are supporting you, and different staff that are supporting your time at MacIntyre.
And Rhiannon, do you think that you should ask people like you, people who are supported by MacIntyre as well?
Yeah.
So what we've got is Mark's suggesting that you ask everybody who's supported, and Rhiannon's saying, yeah, ask students as well. And then staff. What about people's families? Should you ask the families of people that MacIntyre support?
We would need to tell them and stuff about that we've made these promises at MacIntyre, and maybe they might want to see them. Maybe. Do you think that's a good idea, Sam? Or
I think it's a good idea to sort of maybe check out. Go on, Kirsty. Yeah, let's see what Kirsty says.
So that feels really comfortable to me, because we've already said that one of the things that we should probably do is check that people we support know what the promises are, but we could do that with families as well, just to understand if they know that the promises exist and what they are.
And in a lot of cases, family members are the people we support's best advocates, aren't they? So, and know them the best. So definitely, I think family. And Ian said that. Yeah.
You think so, Ian? Okay. So what we've got now is we've got a list that says people supported by MacIntyre, direct support staff, people who support people, managers, families. So at the moment we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 groups, big groups of people you need to think about. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest, Gary and I talked about this before, we're going to ask Catherine to put people in rooms. You know, we've done this before where we go in smaller groups, just so you can talk about it. Because we want you to talk about what's the best way of asking that group. And I'm going to give you each a group. Does that make sense? So your job, we're going to have about 11 minutes maybe. And your job is to think about how can we ask those groups of people, what will be the best ways of asking that group that we are thinking about in our room, what's the best way of asking them about the promises? Is that okay? Is that all right? Now, will one of you in the group make sure you just take some really rough notes because it doesn't record for those of us, you know. Is that all right? Brilliant. Catherine, send us into rooms. Okay, are we all back? Gary, we were just going to get a tiny little bit of feedback, weren't we, from everybody, whether they had ideas? Right?
Yeah. Right. Who's going to start?
I can see Vicky's got her hand up.
We were talking about there's actually members of staff in MacIntyre who have children with a disability, although most of the ones I've spoken to are autistic. So maybe if we talk to staff who actually have a child with a disability, then it might make it easier to, because they see it on both sides. They work with people with disabilities and they have their own children with disabilities, so it'll actually do that.
That's a good idea. Then our family members that are have a disability.
Great point, Mark. Yeah. And I think Kirsty has some thoughts on that, maybe.
Mark, I'm not sure that there's an easy way for us to know of staff members that have got family members with disabilities. But I'm sure if we put a call out through the intranet, then the staff that would be keen to talk to us about how we do this well.
Yeah.
And it was all Vicky's idea. It was a fabulous idea.
Yeah, great.
Really good idea, Vicky.
What about a MacIntyre-wide email?
Yeah.
You know, send one email to everyone and ask if they can help, or if they are a parent with a child with a disability, can they contact so-and-so at this email?
When we deliver training, it's a lot of staff who say, I have a son or daughter with a learning disability or autism. And a lot of people are happy to share their stories so that our other staff can learn from these. And that's really important. So I think if we did a call out, like Kirsty said, we'd probably get quite a lot of people coming forward, which would be fantastic. Yeah.
Well, they know how it feels on both sides.
Brilliant. You're absolutely right, Vicky.
Sounds really good idea.
And having a child that they need to support with a disability.
Vicky, do you want me to back on the other discussions that we had within our group? So I've made some notes. Do you want me to feed that back?
Yes. Yeah.
We talked about, we've got the family consultant in MacIntyre, a lady called Nikki Payne. So we
I got that.
We need to be talking to Nikki, and I know that she runs regular Let's Talk sessions with families in the evenings.
Yeah.
So we thought that might be something we could use to talk to families about the promises. Now, we did have a bit of a discussion about it would be remiss of us not to ask people if they want their families involved before we approach all families. So we had a bit of a discussion about actually going out to all families perhaps isn't the right thing to do, because some people that we support may not want their families to be asked that question. So we talked about where do we find the keen families really, and how do we do that well. So the purpose of what we want to ask the families, so are we asking the families whether we are delivering to the promises, or are we talking about the content of the promises? So actually we need to be thinking that our discussions with families are about what the content, so what the promises say, and not whether we are delivering that to their son or daughter, because actually that's for their son and daughter to say we are delivering that, not the family member. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we had some useful discussions, and definitely some good ideas about how we engage with families in a meaningful way, but being respectful of the fact that people with support might not want their families involved.
Great. Mark, who was in your group with you, and did you have anything you want to share with everybody else?
I was in that group.
Yeah. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, that's all right. You said, Mark, about what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And asking users, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, this is what I don't getting the right ways to ask them because everybody's different.
So not just one way, you need to ask the same questions in different ways that make sense to people. Oh, that's easier for them. Brilliant. So what about, we've heard from people who supported group and the families group. Which ones have we got left? Who was in another group? Meg.
Okay, so I was in the group. Our focus was direct staff. And we spoke of different ways on how we could look at the promises. So a few of them were to have posters in the different services, like visual aids, maybe little things like this in services, but with the promises, so that they're easy to hand. Jane mentioned about she used the promises when recruiting in her service. They did like little workshops. We came up with maybe quizzes about the promises just to make it fun. We got all sorts of ideas, surveys and questionnaires. Paul mentioned about people we support offering like little workshops around the promises, like role play and things like that. And then we said about song and audio, making it fun that way and memorable that way. On to you now, Gwen.
Brilliant. They sound like great ideas. Thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, Gwen.
Hi, we had managers. So we wrote down a few questions for the managers. Have you seen the MacIntyre Promises? Are they working? How many are there? Just to see if they've noticed them. And do they make sense to you? And the reason for the do they make sense to you was because managers have all kinds of different jobs. And Sam was saying, would the promises make sense to somebody in finance? And maybe they would need help to understand what they mean in their job role. And then we talked about how to ask, but we did that at the last minute, didn't we? And our idea was maybe try SurveyMonkey. And apparently MacIntyre pays for SurveyMonkey, so Tess was telling us that. And you might be able to add a picture to it to remind people what they are. And we did talk about the fact that there's posters and things of the promises all over the place in MacIntyre, but maybe people have started to walk past them and not see them anymore. And Sue Ling said we need to stop and have a look at them. That was it from us.
Right, is that all right? Brilliant. So thank you all. So there's quite a lot to get on with there, isn't there? Now, I want to, before we move on, ask who's going to do that. So if Catherine's going to promise to make some notes, whose job is it to start thinking about those ideas and finding out different things that you need to know to get on with it?
Well, I'm thinking that Gwen, it's part of the work plan was for Gwen to lead on this piece of work. So perhaps, like you say, Sam, if I pull together from what everybody said, what this group seems to be saying, and then if Gwen and I start that conversation and then come back to people with what the next step might be. Does that make sense? You happy with
Great.
that?
Kirsty, go on.
Yeah, I'm happy to be involved, ladies.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
Great. And are any of you up for chatting to Catherine or Gwen outside of this meeting if they need a bit of help? Can they contact you? Yeah, so we've got some volunteers. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So Paul and Ian, you can be contacted, can you? Like those questions about your films on the promises, people can get in touch and find out about what you did and that kind of stuff. Brilliant.
Yeah, and we can share those with everybody. Paul's kindly shared those already, so we can get those out.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So Catherine's going to kind of make sure you've got some notes. Her and Gwen will catch up, and then they might be in touch with the rest of you to talk about if they need your help working up the plan. That sound okay? Perfect.